Hello, I'm John Felt. Welcome to the NCGA Ag Weather Outlook for January 23rd, 2016. Well, the big story that is occurring and will occur over the next 24 hours or so is the blizzard over parts of the eastern U.S. Before I get to that, let's take a look at precipitation over the last 7 days. I mentioned in the middle part of the country it would be a fairly quiet week, and you can see from precipitation that the heaviest precipitation was over the southeast U.S. and over the far western U.S. And in the middle part of the nation, there was a fairly quiet week with light amounts of precipitation. Now, there was a band of some more significant precipitation, very modest, really only about a quarter inch or so, that came in the form of snow, but overall fairly quiet. And look at the lee side of the lakes. Again, you can see the enhanced precipitation as the winds flow over the lake and provide enhanced snowfall on the lee side. Now, if we look at where the snow fell last week, this does not capture the East Coast blizzard yet. It shows prior to that system, but you can see that fairly large part of the Midwest got very light amount of snow. This is an inch or so. A couple areas in that shade of orange got a bit more. Eastern Kansas, a few spots here and there over Missouri and Illinois and Indiana, but that was pretty far and very much scattered as far as the coverage. In most areas, received just an inch or so of snow. Now, if we look at the snow depth here, not much change from last week. We do have some pockets of heavier snow over southwest part of Minnesota. It's not a real extensive, deep snowpack at this time. With some milder temperatures, we can erode this fairly quick. Over the eastern Corn Belt, you can see very light amounts of snow, if any, and that will go very quickly once temperatures get above freezing. Even where there's more significant snow, say in the upper Midwest, you can see these pockets here of lighter amounts. And when you get these pockets of lighter amounts, when it starts to melt, it's going to work this way in all directions from here. And that is an area that will work a little bit quicker to melt that snow. Here's another lighter amount, another area of lighter amount, another area right in here. So these will all start to work outward once we start to melt that snow. On the other hand, if this was all covered with a total snow cover, the snow melt would be less. You can also see on the lee side of the lakes the enhanced snow very clearly right in here, these darker shades. But as you know, it's been very cold, so right now we're not getting any snow melt. The orange is showing where that snow melt would be, and temperatures have been cold enough that the snow that's on the ground, at least over the last week, we've had very little melting. Now, over the last couple months, I've talked about the Arctic Oscillation. It's just a very general idea of getting the big picture. This isn't going to be predicting day to day, but it gives us the big picture. I wanted to sort of go through the winter progression so far, and we started out early this winter in November, and above this line, it's considered a positive Arctic Oscillation, and below a negative. And this is generally what occurs is over the eastern U.S. If it's positive, we're looking at milder than usual conditions, and if it's negative, colder than usual conditions. There are a lot of exceptions to that, but that's sort of the big picture, the generalized picture. So since November 1st, you can see we've had this positive Arctic Oscillation. That's why the winter started off very mild. And just recently, since the first of the year, we dipped into this negative Arctic Oscillation, and that's been the second major temperature trend so far this winter, and that's brought our very cold weather. And now here's the outlook in red, and it's going back into the positive territory. So looking at that, what we would say our odds are favoring a milder type pattern as we get into the latter part of January, perhaps into early February. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as I go through our briefing. The other thing I want to point out is that when we're in these predominant negative Arctic oscillations, the weather is generally cold but also more stable and dry, so there's not as much prospect of major snow events, and that's what we've seen recently. It's along the transitions, and when we get into the positives where we have a deeper gradient of temperature, and that's when we can get those snow events. Okay, so let's talk about the forecast as we go forward. Here's the jet stream pattern this week. We had a lot of blue over us over the last week, saying the jet stream was further south than normal. Right now, we're in more of a zonal pattern. That means a west to east flow, a pretty normal type flow, not a lot of energy, and any energy that's embedded in this flow is moving very quick. Now, of course, we've all heard about the blizzard on the northeast U.S. Here's the flow around the circulation here of low pressure. Very clearly see it. Winds are flowing around. It's just offshore. It's funneling this deep moisture right in, and that's getting into the cold air and providing your snow. And I'm sure we've all heard about that because that's the big national story over the weekend. So that'll be moving through fairly quick. If we look at the paths of lows, you can see it's moving very quickly offshore. So that's going to be a weekend story, and that'll be out and away from the U.S. very quickly. And these are tracks of surface lows, and there really aren't going to be any real strong surface lows this week. So I'm not looking for major snowstorms. There will be one minor clipper that I'll be showing you in just a second here. Now, temperatures this week are going to be variable, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. Temperatures, that some of these averages are coming about by fluctuations of several days above normal, several days below normal, and that's going to be more of the pattern we're getting into rather than a prolonged above or below normal. So here's your average for this week, and here's your precipitation average. So it does look like for most areas a fairly quiet week as far as precipitation. But there will be some, and it'll be most likely cold enough for snow in some areas, closer towards a mix in other areas. But right in here, there's going to be what we call a clipper system. I put a post out about that last week that described the different types of storm systems. This one here moving up the east coast is called a nor'easter. Ones that sort of come in this direction, very strong ones, are called panhandle hooks, and ones that sort of come in this area are called Alberto clippers. This is a clipper system, lighter amounts of precipitation, and if we look at that snow forecast, there is the possibility of some modest, generally in the 2 to 4 inch range across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, a bit lighter to the south of that track right in here. But overall, for this time of year, I would call that a fairly modest system, nothing all that significant. Of course, you've heard about the several feet of snow over the parts of the mid-Atlantic states as that system moves offshore. But overall, pretty quiet week. Now we look a little bit further out into early February. Again, it looks like a generally west to east flow, a flow that doesn't have a whole lot of energy in it to spin up strong storms, a flow that is anything near normal temperatures with some variability. And a matter of fact, the models during this period show temperatures to be averaging above normal in the 6 to 10 day period. Again, when I looked at these models in more detail, that does not mean that every day is going to be above normal. There will be intrusions of cold air, but for the most part, it does not look like they will be prolonged. When I look at precipitation week 2, this is something we'll have to keep an eye on. It looks like it could be a little bit more active. Remember I said we get out of that real cold, deep cold air, we might have an increase in precipitation. So a possibility in the period of 8 to 14 days out of more active type precipitation. Might be rain, might be snow. A little bit hard to say at this time, but I'll be keeping an eye on that. And if that does look like that will be occurring, I'll let you know in a post later this week, but could be a little bit busier. So your takeaway points right now, no alerts for the central Corn Belt. I don't see anything unusual as far as temperatures or precipitation. I think it'll be not as cold this week compared to last week. Great Lakes area, a modest snow event, some lighter snow over the upper Midwest, and continued below normal snow amounts and precipitation elsewhere during the week, and overall alternating temperatures. Several days of temperatures a bit above normal, followed by several days temperatures below normal. I think that's going to be the tone as we go through the next week or so. So have a great week, and I will be talking to you again next weekend.